So again, happy Friday, everybody. Let's get started like we normally do. Short period of bell meditation. Wherever you are behind your avatar, please get into a nice meditation posture. And as I ring the Ching bell here in Second Life, the idea, focus on the sound of the bell. Really get that deep listening going. Really get that focus and concentration going so you can absorb some Dharma. You'll probably get distracted. When it happens, just gently remind yourself and go back to focusing on the sound of the bell. Then there's that short pause. I'll do the 3 recitations, another short pause, and then on with the talk. So I'm going to give you a moment, get into a nice meditation posture, and you begin at the sound of the bell. I go for refuge to the Buddha, the teacher. I go for refuge to the Dhamma, the teaching. I go for refuge to the Sangha, the taught. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dhamma. I take refuge in the Sangha. I have taken refuge in the Buddha. I have taken refuge in the Dhamma. I have taken refuge in the Sangha. 3 pure precepts. Cease to do harm. Do only good. Do good for others. Bodhisattva vow. However innumerable all beings are, I vow to lead them all. However inexhaustible my delusions are, I vow to extinguish them all. However immeasurable the Dharma teachings are, I vow to master them all. However endless the Buddha's way is, I vow to follow it completely. Swaha. All right. So today the subject is one of the 3 recitations, and that's the 3 pure precepts. So here we go. So the 3 pure precepts, they arose in their different forms, or they got their foundation, if you will, from a verse in the Dhammapada, particularly the Buddhavagga Sutra. It's verse number 183, in case you want to look it up. And it said this, it said, to avoid all evil, to cultivate good, and to cleanse one's mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. So, read that again. To avoid all evil, to cultivate good, and to cleanse one's mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. Now, like I said earlier, different translations have come up, different ways of viewing this, and they've changed over the centuries as, the Dharma is wont to do, right? It's dynamic, just like we are. And it would change according to culture, place, and tradition. But no matter how the wording came out, they were all directed toward doing good as a fundamental part of a Buddhist practice. So it pays homage, for example, to the Bodhisattva idea. But the vows, and they are vows, that's why they call them precept, they call them 3 pure precepts, and precepts are vows. These vows, they are a personal contract and they're a social contract. And as we go through this today, I'll give you a little flavor of one and the other, the personal and the social. But I want to start out by directly speaking, little short bits about each of those: to avoid all evil, to cultivate good, and to cleanse one's mind. Because this was, let's call it the original, the OG, if you will. So, evil. Ooh, we hear a lot about evil. People like to use the word evil. He's evil, it's evil, that's evil. But evil in Buddhism, we don't view it the same way they do in the Judeo-Christian worldview. Evil is not a thing. Evil is not a person. Evil is not an action. Evil is bad choices. Evil is the bad choices that human beings make when they live a life ignorant of the causal nature of the universe and the broad, unwholesome effects of suffering. So evil, it's just bad choices. Unless, of course, there is an underlying neurological problem. The brain isn't firing right for some reason or another. With that, it's still not evil, right? Because they're not able to make the choice, but it's just not evil. There's not that intent. Now, so that's a genetic thing. So again, unless there is an underlying neurological problem brought on by genetics, people make the choice to do evil. They make the choice to keep on doing harm. They make the choice to do only harm. They make the choice to do harm to others. As Buddhists, we would choose to cease to do harm, to do only good, and to do good for others. We choose to make better choices. So then it says to cultivate good. Cultivating good begins with, again, the individual making better choices. This is what I tell my nieces and nephews. If you go out into the world and you just make the better choices that you can make, things are going to go along pretty good usually. So, make better choices causes the arising of positive karmic consequences, and those consequences engender more positive intent and action beyond whatever the individual has done. Engaging the intentional practice of doing only good leads naturally to doing good for others when one experiences that their good actions result in more good actions. And they accept that most of the positive consequences they may never be aware of. And that's okay because we know they happen. So we accept that we're not going to know all the positive consequences. We're not even going to know all the negative consequences. But we know there will be consequences. So this is one aspect of Buddhist practice where A little bit of faith is essential, but it's verified faith, which we've talked about before. So we have the faith that one person's good thoughts and actions will encompass much more wisdom and appropriate action. For the beginning practitioner, the action and mindfulness required for each pure precept are meant to be learned gradually, step by step. And as experience and knowledge are gained, they become spontaneous thoughts and actions. They just become part of how we are. They are our Buddha element realized. Like any learning and practice of Buddhist philosophy, the initial effect of any training is personal. It always starts with us, right? And for engaged Buddhists, these precepts are not only viewed as personal objectives, things we want to do for ourselves, but are equally important focuses of our social engagement, how we choose to deal with others, and of course with this planet that we get to live on. Elfbiter, I thought I saw you come in. Happy Friday. So let's look again at the three pure precepts. I want to do them again here. Oh, hello, Rolo. Happy Friday to you, too. So the three pure precepts are cease to do harm, do only good, do good for others. So we're going to start with the first one. Why not? Cease to do harm. There is a man who may say, I do no harm. They believe that they've developed some insight into themselves. They've looked at their personal thoughts and actions, and they say, I do no harm. So he thinks, hey, he doesn't pick fights. He avoids hurting living beings whenever he can. His major pastimes are sitting on the couch, eating chips, and watching horror movies. And he says, hey, how can I do any harm that way? Well, this is actually doing harm through inaction, which inaction, by the way, in Buddhism is still considered an action, right? Because you choose not to do anything, that's an action. So he might say, but isn't this ceasing to do harm? Yeah. In some ways, yeah. But the first precept isn't only about the harm we do to others. It is also about the harm we do to ourselves. Avoiding exercise, except for walking back and forth to the kitchen to get chips or the DVD player to switch the movie, is doing harm. The body-mind, it needs stimulation, it needs exercise, and it needs exertion in order to be healthy. The mental ingestion of violence, say just for violence sake, does do harm to the psyche. We know that. And this doesn't mean that one will go out and perform violent acts after watching a violent movie or playing some violent video game or something. But what it does do is it desensitizes us from violence, and it begins to dampen our awareness of the violent thoughts and actions that may arise in ourselves or that we may see in others. And so we begin to lose grasp of the suffering that is caused by it. Because the body-mind, it needs calmness. It needs knowledge that encompasses the world, and it needs examples of compassion and vitality. These things can be found in the same media that brings us the opposites. The media, whether it be books or movies or videos on YouTube or whatever, we know that can bring us violence and all that, but we also know that it can bring us happiness and laughter and joy and caring. So they're like books of fiction, and I've brought some of these up before. There's Roland Marullo's Breakfast with Buddha. And there's a great compilation of short stories that's in a book called Nixon Under the Bodhi Tree. And then there's books of nonfiction like Peter Mathiasen's The Snow Leopard, which you haven't read it, I hardly recommend it. And Thich Nhat Hanh's Old Path, White Cloud. And there's videos like Crazy Wisdom and the Dharma Brothers. And there's that host of YouTube videos that offer entertainment also that teaches valuable Buddhist lessons. But you have to engage them, right? So you've got choices. You can sit, eat chips, and watch horror movies and ingest violence and all that. Or you can still be entertained, but be entertained in a more wholesome way, a way that will lead you further on this chosen noble path. So I like to use a metaphor of the body mind. I keep using the term body mind here as a tub of muddy water, but it's a crystal clear tub so you can see, right? So you've got the water, you've got the mud. The mud is the negative dispositions, those habits, and those influences that we subject ourselves to. And an objective for Buddhist practice is to clear the water. So the idea is like you're clearing the body mind. You set aside negative influences and you aim toward the positive. So you don't stir up the water. And gradually the mud settles to the bottom and the water clears. And this happens in the body mind. Think about how you feel after you watch violent acts, whatever they may be. Maybe reading it in a book, seeing it on a show, whatever. You can find yourself being queasy, a little excited, overexcited, maybe kind of nervous, a little agitated, and anxious. And you recognize that these are negatives, and these are what stir up the mud at the bottom of the body mind. And the practice of taking positive, wholesome actions and thoughts, this adds clear water and will eventually dilute the mud so much that it will hardly be noticed. So we look at the mud as those negative dispositions and habits. Notice, I never said it would all go away. We're human beings. It's hard to make that all go away. But we can bring it down to where it's so low in the bottom of the tub of the body mind that, again, it's barely. Mindfulness directed inward and outward will reveal instances of causing harm that we'll have never realized. And it will help our awareness of the three root poisons. Those are greed, anger, and ignorance. These are the most common dispositions that can lead us to harming ourselves or others. The same mindfulness will direct us toward ways to change, to make positive differences, both personal and social, and then we can really begin to cease to do harm. So that's ceasing to do harm. We're not only talking about doing it to ourselves, right? We want to cease to do harm to ourselves and to others. But in all gradual training in Buddhism, it begins with us, right? We do want to cease to do harm to us first. How do we talk to ourselves? How do we treat ourselves? What is our view of ourselves? Do we lie to ourselves? Or do we tell ourselves the truth? These are all ceasing to do harm. So next is do only good. No pressure, right? No pressure. Do only good. Come on, it's got to be easy just to do only good. The idea, right, should be just don't do bad things. Seems pretty easy. But in every lesson I teach at the Buddhist Center here, and I've been doing this now 10 years, it doesn't matter if I'm talking about karma or Buddhist history or pluralism or even the three pure precepts that I'm talking about today, my intention is to do only good. But somewhere, sometime, in some talk, I am likely to say something that will upset someone. Maybe it goes against their worldview. Maybe it goes against their long-held beliefs. Does that mean that I or any of the other teachers and facilitators at the Buddha Center should not talk about difficult subjects for fear of upsetting someone? No, because our purpose or our intent is to do good. We are intent on offering a message that we believe will have positive value to those hearing. None of us want to upset or anger anybody. And when it happens, it is not a product of our intentions. Instead, it is a product of the person's perception and their own negative habit energy. Do only good. So much of that is based in intent. But this is where do only good becomes a personal act. Don't take things so personally. Seeing other people's actions or life experiences as personal attacks on you. The majority of the time they aren't. And so what if they are? Those experiences are impermanent and they're sure to pass, so why waste good emotions on them? So this is the idea of doing only good for yourself, is don't take offense at everything. Don't think everybody is after you. May be true, but find out if it's a fact first. Do only good for yourself. And then the last thing is do good for others. So doing only good would seem to automatically lead to doing good for others. Not so. Looking closer at human tendencies, it becomes clear that doing only good can certainly end with the self. It can be a very personal thing. Think about self-gratification, self-love, self-aggrandizement, and self-involvement. While a tiny amount of good might extend from those things to others, there isn't the intent to do so. So doing good for others must be intentional thoughts and actions in order for the positive karmic consequences to encompass a broader bunch of humanity on this planet. A lot of times I hear this. Doing good for others just takes so much effort and so much time. Well, this delusion becomes the excuse that many use to hide from the suffering that is all around them. Strangely enough, unless it's their own suffering. Doing good for others can be as simple as smiling at others, showing gratitude for what is given, and offering compassion and respect to all without any expectation. It's a very simple way to do good for others. But it can be as complex as volunteering for a group that helps others, starting your own nonprofit that's meant to meet a need that you have realized, or setting up a regular donation to any organization that does work to alleviate suffering. That'd be a little more difficult. So do good for others. So we can look at it as cease to do harm. That's setting us up for do only good, do good for others. Each one of these vows, like so much we do in Buddhism, is all interconnected and interdependent on one. We can't do good for others if we don't first cease to do harm. We can't do only good if we haven't ceased to do harm. And we can't cease to do harm if we're not doing good for others. So they're all interconnected and interdependent on one another. Excuse me. Now, looking back to the traditional precepts, you'll notice that cleanse the mind is not mentioned in the more contemporary precepts. Cleansing the mind is an important ideal in a Buddhist practice. The mind is all that very important, right? So all of the intent and action, the effort and concentration that is integral to the practice of cleaning the mind will result in hindrances and defilements being subtracted from the subconscious and the conscious mind. And gradually the mud will settle out of the water. Then that intent, that action, the effort and concentration, it's got to be maintained so that the water remains clear. That is a cleansed mind. Now, saying cleansed mind makes you think, it's all done, it's all happened, it's over. So maybe we should just call it, we should be in a perpetual state of cleansing the mind. So our intent is to always be mindful of how we're thinking and acting, to always be aware of how those actions and thoughts are affecting those outside of us. Cease to do harm. Only you know what harm you may be causing to yourself and others. You have to think about it. A little contemplation, a little rigorous self-honesty. Do only good. I recommend start that with yourself. In fact, we could say do only good. Let's make that the personal aspect. I'm going to do only good for me. Do that for a while. Let that gradually build into something that becomes part of how you are, treating yourself better. That doesn't mean buying yourself everything you want. That doesn't mean every little thing that, every little desire that pops up in your mind that you fill it. No. I mean, do only good. Do those things that will strengthen your spiritual self, that will strengthen your practice, that will strengthen you as a better human. And then you can go and do good for others. Because then you know what it's like. So 3 pure precepts, they are a vow. Now, like any vow, there is such a thing called silent vows. If you don't think that you can do them. But in this particular case, if you said, well, I don't think I can cease to do harm, well, then there's no way you can do only good and do good for others. Or I can't do good for others, well, then you're not really ceasing to do harm, because part of harm is in avoiding helping others. Again, interconnected and interdependent on one another.